Experience with Speculator Seth. Very special guest on tonight. Seth is a former software engineer for Goldman Sachs. He has a very interesting background in the financial industry. Nowadays, he's a established streamer with his own community on Discord. He does daily market commentary on financial markets, specifically trading futures, as well as a lot of political analysis while he's trading. So, welcome everybody to episode number 6. Welcome, Seth. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to some of the guys that are on our show for today right now. Seth, lot of interesting things I want to discuss with you today. But first, I want to say big thank you for coming out to our show. And also, just to stay in line with the theme of our show, I brought a nice beverage here, which I think profiles the guests quite a bit. So I brought a Big Ben Porter from the Brasserie du Monde. To me, I feel like this is a good representation of Seth, who I think is a guy who's got a taste of the corporate world and said this wasn't for him, so he went to the microbrews. So this is my representation of Seth in a bottle. What do you think of that?
Yeah,
How
well,
accurate is that?
it's you're not used to normally to people saying, like what their impression is of you, like being a. I mean, obviously, I'm not like a huge person, but we get a decent number of subscribers every day, and people that say what they think about me and stuff, and it's always like you're just not used to it, and it's very just flattering that people even care who you are or what you think it's just like an amazing experience, and I'm just glad and lucky that I've had the opportunity to do all this.
Hey, well, you know what? I think you did some wonderful things with your own streaming, which I would like to discuss with you a little bit more. But to be honest with you, man, I actually got into building my own Discord community and streaming myself because I've stumbled upon your channel on Twitch, which basically inspired me to kind of do something very similar. So yeah, shout outs to you for planting the seed for myself to build my own community and whatnot. So thank you very much for
Which
that.
is great. But people always come in, like I've had a few times where people come in and ask me questions about like starting a stream and stuff, and they'll come in Discord. My other guys in Discord will be like, "Oh, there's somebody out there trying to steal," and I'm like, "No way!" Like, as more people that you get streaming this, the better it is for the space in general, because it's hard when you're just doing it as one person. But when you've got a community that's not just around one person, but small little communities all working together, that's where like real magic happens. Like when you
Yeah,
look at what happened on Twitch, it wouldn't have happened if it was just one guy, right? So it's
absolutely,
the group of people
Hello.
that makes it a thing.
Hey, what's
absolutely.
up, Seth? Thanks for
Hey, how
joining
are you?
us. I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Good. Glad to see you
Awesome.
again.
Yeah, good
We,
to see
we,
you
we
too.
spoke last week, so
Yeah.
So Danny, I brought a Big Ben Porter as my profile representation for Seth. What are you bringing to drink?
Yeah. So I see him as a very classy, professional kind of guy. So I got this. As you see, the bottle didn't last very long, but I got this just for you. This is a Japanese whiskey, EY. And I don't know if if you're into malt beverages, but from our discussion, that's the alcohol that kind of came up to mind. So, cheers, guys.
Hey, cheers! All right, cheers to everybody
thank
online.
you.
Matthew, Big Lou, you guys drinking anything or you guys staying sober?
Now I'm actually driving.
Uh, okay, well,
Well,
well, that's off limits for you then.
Sort of.
Yeah, so let's Seth, I really wanted to ask you, when did you get started with your own live stream trading? Why did you do it? And how did you build like to the point where you are now? Because I see you have like very vibrant community, like you have a large community itself, and it's grown by leaps and bounds, and you've got like your own network there of people who are just trading like so many like different products, and it's amazing because people are just sharing information from different asset classes, so it really helps with understanding what's going on all across the board over the market. So if you can touch base on a little bit with regards to that, that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, sure. First thing, just because you just barely mentioned there, but one of the big things that has made our community unique and that I think has been a big driving factor behind why it has been so successful is because we split things out into channels. So normally when you go into, other Discords, it's usually about giving people stock tips and things like that. And on our Discord, we split things out so that it's all of the oil traders trading CL are in this channel. All of the guys trading bonds are in one channel. All the guys trading equity indexes are in one channel. And so you can focus on like one specific asset class. So you're talking about everybody's looking at the same chart. Everybody's looking at the same orders. We're seeing the same things, and you can kind of get a feel for how other people are reacting to it. And that's why it's been really useful. So I wanted to get that out because I felt like that was an important thing in building our community. But in terms of like how it all started and everything, it really kind of like just happened. so like the thing was, like you said earlier, I worked for Goldman Sachs for a while, and I don't like to necessarily name them out. I usually just say it was a large bank, but and I really liked them. I have to say I loved working there. I thought I was going to work there forever, but there's
Life happens.
life happens. Part of it was that the things that we were doing there, it's part of the segment that's getting smaller because the trading is there's just not as much there anymore. And so they, got rid of huge sections of it. But then also, it wasn't necessarily perfect fit for me. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit like difficulty focusing, I guess. And I wanted to trade. So when I left, I just started trading, and it was great. And at first I was not very good because I was trying to trade oil, which is just, oh my God.
Yeah.
I would go in and I would lose like $1,000 on sim every day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not the right thing.
Take a step back right there. I just want to mention to all of our viewers who work with me or with Danny, we always tell people there are two products that you should avoid trading when you first start off. That's oil, and that's like the E-mini S&P 500. Like you'll get washed out so fast.
Well, and gold. Gold can do that too. Yeah.
Well, the E-mini is actually a really fertile ground for trading, but the problem with the E-mini is it's like crack for traders, right? Like it's too awesome. And when you're just starting out, you probably need to focus on.
Yeah, I think the reason why the E-mini exists was that the CME just wanted ways to take more people's money. So,
I mean, it encourages you to trade. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get discount brokerages as well, like AM Futures is giving you E-mini day trading margins at like $400.
Oh yeah,
it's crazy.
All these people this last week though wanting to trade oil, I can't believe it's like, oh, we had this huge unprecedented move. And everybody's first thought is, well, I know absolutely nothing about oil or futures, but I want to trade it now. Like,
all of a sudden, we have these armchair oil experts coming out of the blue. Never even heard of the CL contract, and all of a sudden they're experts.
They're
totally.
Trading USO. They're trading USO like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like when the Fed injected that $1 trillion into the repo, the short-term interest rates, and all of a sudden everybody became an expert on that, even though they had never heard of that before.
Nobody had heard of the repo stuff.
Yeah, nobody heard of repos.
Anyways, so I started trading oil, but eventually I kind of moved over into interest rates, and it had been recommended to me from people at Goldman Sachs that really, interest rates is like a good place to start learning and using the DOM. So I went and I found some education on the DOM. And the way that I started streaming was I was just trading, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And Futures.io was doing a contest where they wanted you to start a video journal. And I knew all of the stuff that I had to do to do the video. I'd kind of been tinkering with it because at the time it was like brand new stuff, right? Like Twitch had like just barely become actually Twitch. Right. And so I started doing it, and I was the only person that did it. Literally nobody else did.
I think to this day, even on Twitch, like there's nobody trading on Twitch. It's all gamers. Even if you
Well,
go
there,
to like the IRL section, it's all game. It's all like
yeah.
people just talking like nonsense. I find that like a shame because, I mean, like I don't really see why like the trading industry itself can't garner a bigger audience from live streaming trading.
Well, yeah. So there are definitely people with markets, right? So on Twitch, for instance, probably the biggest guy over there is the stock guy, and they talk about stocks. You know, he just has trading view up. He only puts up one chart, and they look through charts. But the thing that you typically don't find is trading. And really, if you want to get into trading, you're going to be talking about futures, right?
Right.
Well, the issue with futures is it's really hard. I mean, like 95% of people fail. So you want to get up on a Twitch stream and say like, "Oh, I'm like the amazing trader and you should all follow what I do." That's like what the idea that people have in their minds. But when you go down that road, it doesn't last for very long, because eventually what happens is you'll have a bad day and then you're like too embarrassed to continue. Whereas for me, I just started it as a way to record, to journal it.
Yeah, I
And
think your approach was really funny because like I think you poke fun at the fact that you want people to watch you lose money hand over fist or something like that. And I find that the approach was really funny.
Yeah.
so many more people watch when you lose.
It kind of takes the edge off because I completely understand. I mean, like when I first started off streaming, like those same thoughts like occurred through my head. I'm like, like if I do well, like everybody's gonna watch me, but if I fail miserably, everybody's just gonna laugh at me, and I don't know how long this streaming thing's gonna last. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. So I've always taken it from the approach of, I'm not an expert, I'm just recording it, and like. But people watched. Like, that was the thing that was so crazy to me, was like I posted it there on Futures.io, and I think that we started out with like 100, 200 people. And I would just post it. But like that, those people that subscribed, they would watch the videos. And I never understood why. I think part of it is that being able to watch the order flow over again is like a really big part for that core group. Oh, yeah. But then, kind of around the time that Bitcoin futures came around, I was like, well, I know about futures, so I'm going to explain how this works to the futures, to the Bitcoin guys. And I live streamed that first night that the CME futures went live, and I had like 6,000 people watching it at one point, I think. Wow. Which again, somebody just posted a link, and I'm just showing it, and kind of took off from there, and it just keeps growing. And it's not like I don't put effort into it. It's like I've gone through and like I've learned everything that I can about the video editing and making the content and how to make the channel better, and everything that I've made from the channel I put back into the channel to make it better. But it really is like I don't feel like I did it. I feel like I was just kind of doing my own thing, and it has become its own beast,
That's crazy, man. Because I honestly, I'm taking like the same approach that you are, and I didn't have any guidance other than just kind of like watching what you did, and then I'm just like just trying to just do my thing and just let it grow organically from there. I have no idea how to do video editing. Like I didn't even know how to use OBS. Like I had to watch some YouTube videos on how to use OBS. So
and those aren't easy things to learn either, right? Like video editing can get really complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like over time, like I was able to come up with like fun things where like I can drop money on the screen, So yeah, dropping money on you for coming out tonight.
Yeah.
So just little fun things like that. It took a while to really develop like the ability to do that. And I was lucky enough that I had my partner Danny, who's he has his big background in computer science and data analytics and whatnot.
Right.
And he was able to provide a lot of the guidance on the computer stuff, because that's not really my forte. Like I have no idea what I'm doing there.
Right.
Yeah, so Ghost Squawk basically just kind of evolved naturally. I made a lot of these technologies just to help us trading. It was basically just for me and Chen. And the Ghost Squawk news platform started off as like a Python script on my computer. But then I go over to somebody's house and want to trade it, so I was like, probably a good idea to make a website. And then eventually it just evolved into a product. So I have a background kind of similar to yours. I was a programmer, and I worked at government contractors, in the security field, because right around 2008 was when I graduated. We all remember what happened in 2008. I had my resume on the partner's desk at one of these trading firms in Chicago. And he's like, yeah, we want to have you on board. 2 weeks later, I get a call like, yeah, never mind. So I went into that for a while, and then I just decided, I still wanted to work in finance, so I was just going to do it myself. And just started getting into trading on my own. And now I currently work as a head data scientist at Citi. I ended up getting back into the finance and also starting this. So I have, we put a lot of effort into the Ghost Squawk product, and it just kind of evolved naturally. So it was, as you see, our website is still not 100%, but it's functional, right? We are very proud of the fact that we started as just two dudes in a basement,
right.
just collaborating and watching this grow. So
very good.
to that.
While I have you on this topic of streaming and whatnot, I do see that you have like a very snazzy microphone. What kind of like technology would you recommend for people who are like starting off like yourself? Because like I need some serious upgrades.
Don't spend any. Like, here's the thing. I want to put everything that I make from it back into the stream as much as I can, and but almost all those things are unnecessary. so this microphone, for instance, this is a Shure 55SH. It's really not a very good streaming mic. You can like, when I'm moving my mouse around, I don't know if you can hear it. It's actually built for like singing on stage. But it looks so cool, right? So that's why I got that. But microphones, you have to go into like XLR microphones, which is a big jump. And then cameras, like if you want a nice camera, then you have to get like a mirrorless camera with a good lens and the Elgato 4K stream link so that you can connect it into your computer. I mean, like, it can get out of hand really, really quickly. Whereas,
you could really go off the deep end.
Yeah, if honestly, a basic microphone, or even if you wanted to go step up, a Yeti, and any Logitech webcam is going to be more than enough, and nobody is ever going to notice or care about those other things. And then, all of that other stuff is just kind of nice. This is kind of things to show that, like, hey, you guys have been wonderful, and this is how we pay you back, because we make the stream better.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for that. I had like a wish list of like things I need to upgrade with in due time. But obviously, I don't know how it is for you out there, but like Amazon's taking like 2 months to do any online order deliveries.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, for us out here, it's like 2 months on like non-essential items, right? Like if you want toilet paper, they'll send it to you in like 2 days or something like that. But if you want like like a new headset, it's gonna take like 2 months because they're not taking priority orders. How is it?
It depends on what it is for me. I still get most of my stuff.
Okay. How are things over there for you with regards to the COVID-19, just in general, like around the area where you live?
Yeah, well, so I live in Utah, and Utah is kind of unique in that we're one of the few states that didn't didn't issue a shelter-in-place order. They have told everybody that they should stay at home, but they won't go out and arrest you if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But some cities have taken it upon themselves to issue such orders. So Salt Lake, you go down there, and if you're walking around, they'll arrest you. But for most of Utah, they've kind of taken the approach of, we're going to tell people what they should be doing, and we're just going to hope that they do it. And so far, there hasn't been much of a significant breakout in Salt Lake, and it's kind of starting to look like almost we flattened the curve too much, because at some point you do want to get the infections. But that's where they're at. So I have been at home. I was planning on getting workout equipment before all of this happened. So I ordered my workout equipment, and it all happened before like they shut things down and everything got sold out everywhere. And so I've just been sitting in my house, and I I haven't left this property other than to go and get food for like 4 weeks now. So,
I've been trading at home for like the better half of 2 years. So, in all honesty, it hasn't really affected my lifestyle much, other than the fact that just going outside for food, you see people a little bit more paranoid.
yeah.
Yeah, when this first struck, it was like there was definitely a craziness in the air.
Oh, yeah.
You know, coming from Florida, right? I understand when you know, there's hurricanes. You know, we have a little thing called hurricanes that happens from time to time. And when that happens, there's always a panic in the air. You know, people don't prepare, and then they crush the stores. There's no water. There's food and stuff like that. And it was eerily reminiscent of that situation. And you know, the thing about hurricanes is that even if you do get hit, it's usually, you know, assuming it's not like a Andrew or a Katrina type situation, you might be without power for a couple of days, but it's back to life as usual within a week, right? You know, maximum maybe a week or 2 weeks if you're out in kind of a rural area and you know the power company's got to get out there. But this was scary to me, you know, not because of the virus. I'm always skeptical about you know, when people, oh, it's doomsday, it's gonna, you know.
Oh yeah,
everybody's panicking.
Yeah, that's totally me.
Yeah, but one thing I will not underestimate is people, right? When the craziness of people, especially here in the U.S., right? So there's you know, that's why I took precautions, and you know, I didn't go crazy with the toilet paper situation. I'm not really sure why the number one thing that comes to mind is toilet paper and not, I don't know, food. Little essential things like that. But I bought a bunch of like beans and lentils and things that would last a long time. That you know, worst case scenario, if the power went out and things got really nuts, I have my little Bunsen burner that I could use, a little Coleman camping stove. I got a couple propane things for that. And I could pretty much just use my pressure cooker to make some bean stew. So with that, you know, it really doesn't bother me. And most of the time, I've been working from home since like 2014. So you know, City is completely, you know, mobile now, so I can work from home. Nobody I work with is at the Tampa branch anyway, so I really don't feel a difference. And of course, Ghost Squawk is 100% remote. So this week, I can't wait for more plagues actually, because we're doing great.
Yeah. Well, it really kind of highlights though this problem that we have, and I think that you're seeing it affect markets, and that is that the lockdown affects different people in drastically different ways.
Exactly.
For most of the upper and middle class, those companies were already working on being able to work remotely and to deal with any kind of a disaster, and it not affect their business. And so all of the technology people were all fine. And a lot of those companies aren't really affected by the decrease in demand, so they're not getting laid off. They're just at home. Whereas if you're a working class person, you're not allowed to go to work straight up. Then you're just not making money. And the world for that group of people is completely different for the world for your middle class. And not only that, but people aren't going outside of their houses. So what they hear about the pandemic is mostly from what they read online. Right. And I think we're already really familiar with how much we've created information bubbles, especially in social media.
Echo chambers, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of get this really bizarre thing in the markets where it's really hard to judge what people are doing. And like not only that, but what people are feeling is completely disconnected from what the underlying monetary system is doing right now, because the monetary system is just pumping it so hard. So you got this market where everybody is panicked and freaking out and wants to sell, but the market still goes up, and everybody's like, well, what's going on? It's just like the information is completely all backwards because none of us have the whole picture.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up about the fact that, you know, the working class people are the ones who are really suffering here. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that for like the economic ramifications, because we don't see this going to a good place, right? Because, you know, I think that there was a study that I want to say over 50% of Americans don't even have $400 to their name if they needed some money for, you know, an emergency or something like that. They just couldn't do it, right? So these are not, and especially with the working class, you know, these are our bartenders, our waiters, our things that, you know, they perform valuable service roles, but these aren't necessarily people who have a significant savings. So while it's okay for us to be working from home, and really it's a status quo for us, it's these people who are really suffering. So I'm seeing a lot of, you know, a lot of them have heavy credit card debt and student loans and things like that. So I'm just wondering, you know, where your thoughts are on the economic ramifications of them being in furlough for so long.
Yeah, well, and the kind of the interesting thing about all of that is that so far we really haven't had to deal with any of that, right?
Right.
The government gave everybody pretty decent benefits, so most of the people that are like straight up laid off are making about what they made before they laid off because of the unemployment insurance. And, you know, there was a stimulus where everybody got like $1,400 or whatever. It's only been the past week or so, past 2 weeks, where I've really seen people, like there's been the protests and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely is a signal that some people are starting to reach their breaking point and are fed up with it, especially if you're a small business owner. Those are the ones that are probably going to be the most upset, because for them, it's like they might not ever be able to get their small business back up off the ground after this, right?
Right.
But overall, we haven't really had to deal with it. And so there's this really big unknown question about when things open back up again, you're going to see a really big increase in demand, right? A lot of that demand that's been gone the past 3 months just gets delayed, and it's all going to come flooding out when they open things back up again. And then the question is, when we catch back up, how much aggregate economic activity have we actually lost? And it's almost impossible to really know how much has really been destroyed, right? Like they're saying that right now it's like 35%, but then we're going to have like double the growth in the third quarter there normally would. And in the end, what is the actual change in? It's so hard to predict, right?
Yeah. I think forecasting like 3 to 6 months out is like absolutely ludicrous. Like you're literally throwing
predicting
darts.
1 week out right now.
Right?
Exactly.
So you got all these experts that are like, we're gonna get a V-shaped recovery or a W-shaped recovery. I'm like, you have no clue what 2 weeks is gonna look like from now. Like, how can you forecast something like that?
Look at the weekly unemployment claims. I mean, that's always a pretty I mean, Thursdays are always pretty good trading because they have that, but people used to not really care all that much about the weekly unemployment claims. And now 100%. It's like you can be off by a million, and you know, it can be worse. It can be worse than expected by a million, and the markets still move up because
like last week,
because they expect Federal Reserve intervention. Because they know that the Fed's going to keep propping up this dead baby.
Well, and not only that, but you kind of have to expect that the numbers aren't going to be at the expectations because we just don't have the ability to really predict it.
Well, because this is outside of the whole model. Like we can't fiscal stimulus this problem away, right? You know, our previous debt problems, you know, we could argue the efficacy of these techniques because I, in my opinion, we never really got out of the recession of 2008 for various reasons. But you know, the Fed just could, you know, go to their monetary toolbox and you know, tweak some knobs and back to status quo, right? But this is a situation where we're just not able to do that. So I have no idea how this is going to play out for the markets. I do expect to see a big wave of defaults as these small business owners, for example, as you mentioned, they're afflicted. You know, maybe they won't ever come back to 100%. And even if they do, perhaps that wave of demand that's going to come in from 3 months or whatever it is, all pent up, you know, they're not going to be able to accommodate. So I just think that there's going to be a wave of ramifications that we're just not capable of foreseeing at this point, right? And so it doesn't really look good. And the bond market is pricing that in perfectly. right? So I'm very skeptical of this relief rally in stocks because we see a correlation with stocks and bonds, and as we all know, bonds are where the smart money goes. Seth, I'm a bond trader too, so I look to that primarily for the risk sentiment and what the smart money is doing, and it just doesn't seem that they're convinced.
Yeah, well, I think you have a good point. The thing is that the equities have recovered since the bottom, like what, 20%? Bonds are basically where they were. I think the difficulty that we're going to have in this market again is you have this disconnect from information. In good times, everything is going as what it expected. Let me back up for a second. So when I worked for Goldman, one of the big pieces of software that they have is an object database where they can go in and they can say, here's a company, and the company, they own this, 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 and this. And so I know when the interest rate changes by this much, this is how much it changes the valuation of this company.
Right.
So that's why I'm not a huge fan of day trading stocks, because when you know the information that you're going up against, it's literally, it's just not a fair game. You cannot compete with that information that they have. Well, right now, nobody really has the full picture. Those models are all failing. They don't work anymore because the world has just changed so much. They don't know how to compensate for it. And so you're going to see situations where correlations between markets are more likely to break, because what is affecting one market is going to be different from what is affecting the other market. What affects the bond market right now? Well, the primary thing that affects the bond market is what the Federal Reserve is going to say.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to change them. I mean, it might be years before they change the interest rate. So why would they be moving at all? Right. Meanwhile, equities, they can get pumped up by all of the liquidity in the system, and they can continue to go up. And it's not even like one is right and one is wrong. Like that's normally the way I would look at it. Like, a year or so ago, 2 years when we had that huge liquidity volatility crunch, it was kind of like, hey, the bonds are up and the equities are kind of doing something weird, and something's going to happen. And it did. But right now, I don't even think that that's necessarily what's going to happen. It's, one doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's just they're completely different markets, and it's going to take a while for them to,
No, I completely understand what you're saying. Because watching correlations is one of my thing where I gain an edge from, and I do realize that there's a big disconnect in some correlated markets, like between gold and bonds is a good example. Gold
That's
had
a running theme.
Gold had like a massive squeeze where everybody who owned paper gold was trying to cash out their paper money and go into hard physical cash, right? And that caused gold to drop to like below 1,500, while we're in the midst of this crazy sell-off in the S&P 500. Everybody was just going what the fuck, gold safe haven.
Yeah, well, I don't think it was just that they all came in and they wanted to sell. They were forced to sell.
Yeah, they were forced.
It was a margin call.
Yeah.
You go and look at the treasuries. They're only putting 1,500 contracts up on the treasury. And before all of this, if it was below 4,000 contracts, I wouldn't trade because the liquidity was too low.
Too low, yeah.
We're basically in a perpetual, never-ending flash crash now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, flash crash up or down.
yeah. In that kind of a market, it can move wherever the traders want it to, because there's just not a lot of liquidity to stop them.
Yeah, it's like trading Bitcoin.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
You touched on something interesting earlier. I wanted to get your opinion on this. Obviously, I think we're all in the same camp that once we get out of this COVID-19 crisis, the world is going to look a little bit different. Through our channel, we were discussing some investments that would be good to look into for the long run, right? So we were looking at things such as Johnson & Johnson, baby products, because we figure with everybody being home, you're going to have a lot of a baby boom taking place 9 months down the road. Some other things that we were looking at, financial stocks, banking stocks and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I know that the banks are preparing for a wave of defaults. So I think that in the next couple months, when that wave hits, we might be able to get some good prices on these things. And, it's a recurring theme. I say this over and over. I can't really say it enough about how if you believe that like JP Morgan and, BB&T and all of the big names, Citi and all that, if you believe that they're going to be there tomorrow, then you're going to be able to get bargain prices on them. If you don't believe they're going to be there tomorrow, then we have a lot bigger problems.
Banks are always a really, really great pickup at the bottom of the prices. I mean, back in 2008, the banks were a really great pickup, right?
Yeah, I actually made about 10K one of my first trades in 2008 doing just that.
Yeah. Now the thing is the difficulty with it. Well, first of all, one thing that I believe is changing, or maybe it's just that I hope, because I'm a really big proponent of buying individual stocks. I'm not really a huge fan of this. Everybody should put everything in an index fund, and that's not. Somebody has to pick the stocks, and people need to own the stocks, because that's how public companies work. Is that
right.
Because we own the public company, we can tell the public company what we, the public, want them to do and affect their policy. And otherwise, the system doesn't work, right? Otherwise, it's just the guys up at the top on the board make all of the decisions. So I like to see people buy individual stocks, and it looks to me like we're getting into a stock pickers market where you're going to see different stocks. Some are going to do really, really well, and you're already seeing that. And that's kind of the difficult thing, is that the ones that are really obvious plays on this, for instance, Citrix, I think is Citrix and Zoom are a really obvious play, because a lot more people are going to be working remotely.
Sure.
And anybody that doesn't work remotely has to be thinking, well, we have to at least have the ability to do it. So those companies are going to make more in the future. They're already up, but there's definitely going to be that.
I think that there's going to be a larger paradigm shift, because people who could have worked from home all along are going to be like, well, wait a minute, I could have been doing this all along. Why were you forcing me to do this in the first place? So
commuting for 45 minutes a day, God damn it.
Exactly. And all this bitching about carbon emissions and pollution and all that. Well, there you go. That's a great way
to
work
from home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about that one. I've seen some data from people, not at where I work, but people talking about it online, where they were saying that like the actual productivity at their places of work in terms of like how much time workers spent active on the screen and typing things has gone down by like 30%. But that's going to be a debate they're going to have to battle out. But
yeah, exactly. There's multiple ways we could look at that. I've also heard statistics where of the 8 hours a day or 8 or 9 or whatever, people only work for maybe 2. Yeah. Right. So just because they're not on their screens, maybe they've tabbed over and are on their Facebook or whatever, which they would be doing anyway if they're at work. Right. So
it's very, very conflicting, because I've also read studies where people say like where companies are saying they get more productivity out of their workforce when they work from home and they're able to kind of like work around their own hours.
Exactly.
As long as you get the 8 hours put in, it doesn't matter like what chunk of time you sort of do it, as long as you do your 8 hours. But they're saying that the productivity within those 8 hours are increasing. So it's gonna be really interesting to see the statistical data coming out from this.
I can vouch for that, because a lot of times a lot of people I work with are offshore, right? So they're in India or wherever, and so I'm not like, fine, I'll agree to meet somebody at 6:30 if I'm at home. Right. If I would have had to stay at work, an hour and a half past 5, I'd be an angry panda. Right. So for me, it's not a problem.
Yeah. So, there are definitely some sectors that are going to do better than others, but there's kind of also this other thing, which is like, what's not going to change, because there's a really big ideological thing going on, and I don't think that everybody kind of quite realizes how significant of a thing it is, and it is really starts with this whole are we flattening the curve or are we crushing the curve? Usually isn't presented that way, but that's really the question: is do you close things down so that you don't reach hospital capacity. But then after the curve has been flattened and the hospital capacity is no longer at risk of being exceeded, you want to reduce the restrictions so that you can develop herd immunity. You want to develop maximize herd immunity, but also not reach the hospital.
No, I completely agree with you, and that's one of my issues with the lockdown is that everybody is confined indoors, right? You won't be able to develop that immunity because you won't be exposed to anything, right? And then you're just going to see another wave of this once you open the floodgates.
Yeah. So the other side of it, though, was that these people think that we should just stay in lockdown as necessary, long as is necessary, until there is like a vaccine or there's no longer danger to people, and maximize saving as much human life as possible. And the people that are on that side, and you really are starting to see it turn into a conservative liberal kind of thing. But when you look at it really comes down to what kind of a society are we going to have a month from now? Because a lot of people want to go back and eat out and go to concerts and things.
Well, they want to resume their lives.
They're not going to go to a concert anytime soon, but
they want to resume their lives, and you can't really blame them for that.
Yeah, and then when you take it a step further, then it turns into, okay, so should the government really be able to make a blatant statement that says all of these businesses have to close? These sorts of questions, and that's really where I think that it's going to be interesting, and it's going to have dramatic effect on companies because, I mean, man, if we're going to sit down and we're going to say every time that there's a pandemic in the future that we have to literally shut everything down for 6 months or a year, how can any small business survive in that environment anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting you brought that up because like some countries are beginning to experience like a second wave of COVID-19 pickup. And it doesn't feel like, some of those countries that are at the forefront of the flattening the curve scenario has really gotten this down. And it feels like to me, it doesn't seem like, it seems like it was a good idea in general. This guy's ordering coffees. Anyways, it feels like it's a good idea in general, but it doesn't seem like there's hard data to back it up, and we're just fucking guinea pigs in this whole situation. Like, let's try this, let's see if it works, and if it doesn't work, maybe a vaccine will come like 3 months from now.
Yeah, well, yes and no. It's kind of a difficult thing because we definitely do not have the data. I mean, like straight up, we do not know what percentage of the population really has it in any one particular area. And if you really wanted to know, okay, at what point can we open everything up because we have enough herd immunity to deal with it, you would have to know that number. And we just don't know. Like we had a study came out in California where they said it was 4%, and that would put the death rate at 0.5. But then we don't even know how reliable that antibody test actually is. Like there's a bunch of questions. And so we're kind of making this decision in the dark. But then at the same time, there are things that we do know. For instance, we do know that Italy reached their healthcare system's capacity, right?
Yes.
So we know that it's a concern and that it can happen. And in the United States in particular, I mean, there's some real concerns about that.
Well, I think you brought up a really good point in that I think that what this is teaching us is how fragile our system really is when we're led to believe it's so robust, and just keeping on. Central banks, got it under control. But what we're seeing is that we were just woefully unprepared for, an event of this nature.
Yeah, well, so this has always been my big, how do I say, kind of like my pet peeve issue, because when we came out of the 2008 crisis, the big kind of impression that I felt that a lot of people got, especially people on kind of more of the left side of the aisle, was that bad things should never happen. That there was this idea that, okay, well, there shouldn't be companies that are too big to fail. There shouldn't be, this shouldn't be able to happen. Why were they able to price all of these things? And that was the real failure. But the reality of life, one of the a market guy that I really like is Mandelbrot. Because you're a math guy, you might be familiar with him, and
Of
his
course, yeah.
his approach on the markets was that the market is essentially a fractal function, which is totally true, and explains why it's so complicated and unpredictable.
Right.
And when he was looking at a risk management from a fractal perspective, the general conclusion that he came to was that crash is inevitable. That even as a small, teeny tiny thing can happen, and it doesn't even have to be a big deal or anything goes wrong, but it can turn into a chain reaction of events that creates a downward spiral and crashes the system.
Yeah, feedback loop.
And so you have to be able to deal with the system crashing. That's just straight up what it is. Now, I think that there was enough smart people out there that they kind of said this, like they did the stress tests was part of it, but they have all these funds and things so that they said if another financial crisis does happen, we can deal with it. Well, I think we're kind of at the same crossroads, or at least we're starting to realize now the truth of it, and that is that any system that's man-made has a tendency to completely collapse, and that you have to have a contingency plan to deal with the collapse. It doesn't mean that like civilization has to end or that capitalism has to end. It just means that we're going to have to deal with starting everything back over again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have a lot of doomsday type friends, like, oh, it's going to be, the end of the world, mass panics, mass collapse, just, restarting everything. Right. And I don't think we're, I think society is kind of heading toward, it's like a pendulum swinging, right? And we're swinging in a direction that's probably not so good, but as with any pendulum, you make efforts to correct it. Sometimes you do the correct thing, and sometimes you just exacerbate the problem. So I think that the next few months are going to be really key to seeing how we deal with it. I think we're already seeing a lot of civil unrest, and that's usually not a good sign. So hopefully we can resolve this pretty quickly. And, so again, we'll see what's going to happen in the short term here.
Yeah, well, and that just kind of brings me to issue number 2, which is that because so many of the people out there were just kind of going along with this assumption that bad things should just never happen.
Right.
And we never really did this study, the data on what you do when things completely fall apart, right? Like all of our economic theory is based on keys. How do you stimulate the economy in a short-term perspective? And all of this data is really like, okay, if you extend unemployment benefits, what is the multiplying factor that provides on the economy over the course of a year? And it really doesn't answer these questions of like, okay, but what do you do when like literally everything falls apart? How do you deal with those kinds of effects over the course of 30 years? What do you do with a system where there's literally no money out there with complete deflation? I mean, we'll complain about how much money the Federal Reserve is printing, but when you look at the measures of inflation, at least the main measures of inflation that the Federal Reserve looks at, they're all still basically flat, which says to me that if the Federal Reserve hadn't printed all of that money, that we would be experiencing a deflationary spiral. And that just shows you like how bad things really are, that the Federal Reserve can print billions of dollars, like billions upon billions of dollars, and it doesn't, it doesn't cause inflation.
Exactly, and I think one of the aspects that the central banks, like to play on is the fact that nobody knows how the fuck they work, right? And nobody knows the fact that they can just magic money into existence. But I think with them having to intervene, like 2008 was a big wake up call for people, because they saw how easy it is that they were able to just snap their fingers and make money happen. And I think again we're starting to see this. So we're like, it's going to cause a lot of mistrust in the government, as if there hasn't been already. It's something like 75% of people believe that 9/11 was an inside job. Now, I don't want to argue that point. I don't want to take us down that road of arguing that point. What I do want to bring up is how many people believe that it was a government conspiracy, right? Just how much distrust they have in their own government. And I would like to revisit those studies after this passes, because people are very pissed, and they're seeing how we're dealing with things. And, just the sheer lunacy of it is really hitting the fan.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't envy Jerome Powell's position, right? Because no
not at
matter
all.
what he does, there's a group of people out there that are going to be upset.
This is
about,
waiting
right?
with the noose. Yeah.
Because there's a pretty good percentage of the economy that does really well with low interest rates, and there's another pretty big percentage of the economy that does well when interest rates are high. And one side or the other is going to be upset when they change the interest rates, right?
Well, exactly. And the point of interest rates is they should be ebbing and flowing in a cycle, depending on where you are in the credit cycle. And since 2008, we haven't really been able to do that, right? I mean, we were able to hike barely get to 2%, right, before just having to go straight back down to zero again. And this has the effects of this. I mean, what about old people, right? What about old people who have pensions, right? Pension funds are primarily
pension funds are screwed right now.
Exactly, because they have by legal mandate, they have a certain amount of bond holdings that they have to have, right? Because of course it's understood that bonds are a little bit more of a safe haven asset, but because of that, they're basically treading water right around barely giving anything, right? The 1-3% range.
Well, they also have credit rating risk too. Like you have like the big credit agencies that can just pull the plug on their like AAA ratings, and then the bond portfolios get liquidated by mandate.
Right.
And you've had this issue where, because so many other parts of the world have had negative interest rates.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened recently was that Japan kind of relaxed the rules and allowed the Japanese funds to be able to come over and buy U.S. treasuries because they weren't getting enough yield over in Japan, and that was part of why we saw this big move up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even in Europe, I mean, they're starting to buy like junk bonds over there as well.
Mm-hmm. But kind of the place where I was going with it, one of the guys, if you follow bonds, that I think you should listen to is Jeffrey Gundlach. And I don't necessarily say that he's right about everything, or that he's even going to be right about this. In fact, I've noticed that if you're the bond king, okay, because before before him it was the PIMCO guy, and he got it wrong, Gross. And that's Gross, and that's why he's not in charge of PIMCO anymore. But one of the things that Jeffrey said was, if the Federal Reserve bails out everybody, then they're not actually bailing out anybody. And I think when you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense. I've always been a big supporter of bailouts, because the person that does the bailout makes money. Like the reason that JP Morgan back in the 1920s was able to accumulate so much wealth was because when in 1917 or whenever it was,
the government came to him for a bailout.
He came in and he said, I will give all of these traders loans. And he was the one that got the economy started back up again. And then he made money off of that transaction. And every time that there is a financial crisis, somebody gets bailed out. And whoever is doing the bailing outing is the person that comes out with the most money. And it could have been true after the 2008 crisis, and the government did make some money off of it, although they, for some reason, don't want to make money, and so they don't make nearly as much on it as they could have. Mm-hmm. But then we come into this issue, which is like, we're not just bailing out like one small section of the economy, are we? We're bailing out everybody. And how does that even actually work? I'm not sure it does.
Well, I think the difference between the bailout needed now versus the bailout needed back in 2008 is that in 2008 there was like one primary industry that was finger pointed at for the cause of the meltdown. This time around, it's not one industry that took down the system itself. It's a viral pandemic, and that caused everything to basically collapse. And so the bailout now, I think, is more socially acceptable because it's. I feel like it's more for like the greater good to just stimulate everybody.
Well,
right?
And I like that at least it's being democratized, right? Because back in 2008, people didn't get stimulus checks. Okay, they didn't get any help.
Well, there was the George Bush actually did give out stimulus checks right towards the end of his term, and a couple of people did get it, but the general feeling at the time was that it didn't really have a whole lot of an effect. And I don't know if it'll be the same with this one because this is so much bigger. But
I don't remember it being to the scale of
yeah, it
this
was certainly not as
one.
big.
So, at least there's some consolation in that sense. One thing that I know, that injected a lot of tremendous civil unrest was just the fact that, it was this too big to fail mentality. Whereas, the cause the 99% or 1% movement or whatever it was, the Wall Street March, because people were just sick and tired of these stimulus attempts going to basically the people that own the 99%, right? So at least now, and again, I'm not arguing that point, that economic point. I'm just bringing this up to elucidate what the people are feeling, right? So I'm thinking and I'm hoping that with this, at least it's going to quell some of that civil unrest. And maybe we won't have such a big impact. But as you see, even in New York, one of the places that's been hit hardest, people are really starting to lose their minds. And I think that that's a combination of financial stress and just the psychological stress from being cooped up all day.
Yeah. Well, you talk about democratizing. Like this big question that I have in my mind is like, what happens to the democratization of the process when we're dealing with the losses? Because what's happening right now is they're kind of passing the buck from industry to industry. Like one of the things that you'll commonly hear from people is that, if you can't work, then you shouldn't have to pay rent. Okay, sure. So we can make a rule that says that nobody pays rent for the next month, that your rent or your mortgage payments will just get tacked on to the end of your mortgage. That seems like a reasonable idea, except for that anybody that's a mortgage company, they're not making money this month now. So now they don't have positive cash flow for the month.
Well, sure.
Okay.
And not only that, but
maybe we can do something about them, right? But then if you fix it with them, then you have all of the banks that are funding those and have securities based on those. And then, so now we have the same thing with we had in 2008, and it just kind of goes around in a circle. And at some point, if there is aggregate GDP loss in the economy at the end of all of this, somebody has to take a loss. And the question is, who is it going to be?
Yeah.
Who's the scapegoat? That's the biggest question here.
Somebody's going to have to take a loss, because if
somebody's
we
going to have
bail
to hold
out
that hot
everybody,
potato.
if we're bailing out literally everybody, then we have to pay for it. You can't just kind of like get everything up and running again and then let the growth take care of it.
Somebody's getting thrown under the bus for this.
Yeah. Well, somebody's going to be left holding the hot potato.
It's a kick the can down the road type of mentality, right? I mean, like all this bailout's going to get paid back through taxpayers' dollar, like sometime down the road. I mean,
hopefully. I mean, so this is another thing, and this is maybe a little bit of a segue, but you were kind of hinting about it, and I'm sure that you want to talk about it. But like, in my mind, giving taxpayers back some of their money is not socialism, right? So we haven't really gotten to that point yet, right? We're basically just giving everybody's taxes back right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I disagree that this is any type of push towards socialism. I mean, I hope we don't have to worry about that movement, gaining traction, because historically we tried that. Every time we tried it, it failed. But I definitely don't think that there's anything wrong.
I think this is pandemic mitigation. I mean, like
exactly,
every world leader is like, what the fuck do I do? Like Justin Trudeau, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, like all the world leaders, there's like, what the fuck do we do in this environment? And I think the only thing that their only solution is, let's just have everybody stay home and let's just pay the bills for everybody.
Yeah, pay the bills. And
I think there's a certain sense, like, what else can you do, really? I mean, I've heard, reports that the virus is actually much worse than they're letting on, and they're not giving the actual data because people would freak out. But what the fuck do you expect them to do? Just throw up their hands and say, we're all fucked? I would love to hear Donald Trump say that. But
You know what? His expressions during those press conferences is probably the best. It's like all you need. He's like,
Yeah, I didn't know this. I
fake
didn't know that you could
news.
just,
You're fake
I
news.
didn't know that you could just drink Lysol and be fine. That was new to me.
Oh man, like honestly, it's a tough job, man. I wouldn't want to be a world leader
Yeah.
during this environment. Like, really, what do you tell? Like, there's the truth, which will fucking like cause massive like panic, and riots, and then there's
I think I'd be honest. I'd just be like, look, guys, we're all fucked, and just let Darwinism work out who survives.
Well, it's definitely throwing him, off of his feet. Like Donald Trump, believe it or not, is actually been a very much decision-based decision maker. A data-based decision maker.
I
You
agree.
can see it really strongly in the way that he ran his campaign. He would say something that was unpopular and the media would disagree with him at, and he would say, no, wait, I know what people really believe and I know what the polling is, and he would run with it. And then later on we would find out, actually they really like that he's doing this. But in this particular case, we don't have the data. He knows that he doesn't have the data to really make the decision that he wants. He kind of has to do what he feels like, and I don't think he 100% trusts.
Well, to that effect, he's actually so focused on data that in Florida he only campaigned in certain counties because he would understand if he could sway just those counties. He knew he probably wasn't going to get South Florida because it's always blue. Right. He knew he probably wasn't going to get, I think it was Jacksonville, but he focused on like Hillsborough, actually Tampa, where I'm at, and a couple other counties because he knew just those straws to pick, right, to sway the whole state. So in that sense, it was a very brilliant campaign. It started out just like a couple dudes, just like me and Shed, a couple dudes in a room, working for his campaign, and it just went crazy.
Yeah. It's like this across the board. You have to make incredibly impactful decisions that are basically going to affect the world for the rest of our adult lives.
Yeah.
And you don't actually have the data to really know what decision you should really be making.
Yeah. And this is, I know that there were some people who were, calling out, I know the Gates Foundation is very famous for bringing this to the public. I want to say one of the first, but I'm sure that there were more. But it just shows us how woefully unprepared we were for this type of situation. And I mean, we kind of should have seen this coming because, I have friends in the medical industry or medical sector, and, MRSA is still a really big problem in hospitals, right? The methicillin resistance. And so, when you have MRSA in a room, you have to wear like hazmat suits, right? Because you just can't do anything. So whether it's a virus or a superbug or something like that, because people take only half of their medications, just, I feel good enough. Okay, fuck it. And what you're doing, obviously, is you're just training the bacteria. And having done that in the lab, I know exactly how it works, right? And so whether it's a bacteria or a virus, we were bound for something like this at some point. And I think that I'm just curious to see how we prepare next time. If there's going to be some protocol that we follow, we have those. I got a tornado alert on my phone the other day. Are we going to get something like that? And I'm just curious to see how this evolves in terms of preparedness.
Yeah. Well, the United States has really been kind of lucky because we didn't really get hit all that hard by the swine flu or from SARS or
Ebola.
any of those. Places in Asia, they had experiences and they knew, and that's why they were more prepared with the testing. So that kind of comes back to the, what can you actually do in the United States? There is a real limit to what you can do, to what people will accept. And I don't think anybody knows where, there's a couple of people out there that are really sure that our freedoms are being taken away, but that's like, according to polls, like maybe 20% of people out there. And I feel like the other 80% are kind of sitting here like, well, I have no clue what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So just curious, kind of an oddball question, but have you had on your Discord people, saying that this was a biological weapon? And if so, like, what's your response to that?
Well, yeah. So one of the jokes on my stream is that I have a theory about how this all happened, and my theory is what if another animal, like let's say maybe it was a bat, or maybe it started with a bat and it like transferred to another animal, and then they ate that other animal, and then it would be transferred to people, and then you wouldn't have any immunity to that disease, and that could create something like this. That's my conspiracy theory. Of course that's like the official scientifically
Well,
leading theory right now, right?
100%. And so my response is this: it's like, look, obviously, yes, it became internet knowledge that Wuhan was a place where they manufactured those sorts of things. I haven't fact checked that; it's just a fact on the internet. But if I could, in a lab, create the most optimal conditions for a virus of this type to just spontaneously evolve naturally, it would be the wet markets, right? There's a bunch of dead animals of different species all packed together at room temperature. You could not create a better laboratory for virus generation than that. And so in my opinion, it was only a matter of time, because I've known about these markets for years, and it was only a matter of time before something bad happened.
I always
sure.
thought it was interesting that the biggest drag in terms of demographics on the real economy is the baby boomer retiring, the waves of baby boomer retiring, and the drag that they're going to have on government spending in terms of pension and whatnot. And it just so happens that this virus comes along and it becomes a thing that kicks all the baby boomers out.
Yeah, but also you have to understand that the baby boomers also have health problems too, right? They have respiratory
that's
issues.
the thing. That's the thing. This virus hits those who are like not in best physical shape, or they are or
imagine that when you're not healthy, you get sicker. Big conspiracy here, right? It's like and my fiance's mother is saying the same thing. She says, oh, they just want to kill out all the old people, or it just could be the fact that you guys aren't very fucking healthy, right? Because a lot of these people have been smoking before they found out the health consequences to that. Over 50% of Americans are obese, not just overweight, obese, right? So in people with pulmonary problems and obesity and those other health afflictions, it just exacerbates the problem. And so I just think it's a natural consequence.
Yeah. Well, so, going back to the, how you get a virus like this, the theory that it was developed in a lab and it somehow escaped accidentally from the lab.
Whoops.
I'm always the one of the people that say for me to put out something like that I believe that sort of a thing, I have to see hard evidence, and
of course,
which is probably just you're never going to get. But from the perspective of, if I was going to develop something in the lab, it makes perfect sense, and I think it is a viable theory. I mean, really, if you're going to develop something in the lab, well, okay, what would be the first thing you would develop in the lab? Something that is just like really contagious and kills everybody, right? Well, we've already developed those, right? So maybe what would be the next thing that you would do? Well, maybe let's develop a virus that would be like the most economically devastating. So you wouldn't want it to kill everybody, but what you would want it to do is you would want it to get as far as it could, and you'd be able to save people. So maybe you could argue that maybe it's slightly more morally acceptable than just killing everybody. But they would have to put a lot of effort into doing it. And when you look at it from that perspective, this virus really kind of hits us in just that perfect way, right? The thing that is so devastating about it is that it has a very high hospitalization rate.
Yes.
If you give them a ventilator, you give them the correct care early enough on, then the survival rate is not much worse than the flu. At least that I believe that's true based on the numbers, but that could change. Okay, but if you don't, then you get what happens in Italy, and the death rate just skyrockets. And so,
not only that, it is different from the flu. The people who say, "Oh, it's nothing worse than the flu," that's wrong, because the infection rate is so much higher. And part of the reason for that is, we humans have been dealing with the flu for eons, right? Whereas this is obviously something very new, and that's why I really I liked the fact that you brought up the fact that all this lockdown is going to have its effect on our own evolved immunity to this.
Yeah. So if I could, I was just reading some of the comments that people were making in chat, and one of them was saying, "Where can I learn?" And I don't want to miss up that opportunity. Learn from the market. I mean, not saying that there aren't education out there that aren't great. There really are some great courses out there, but trading is like playing basketball. Like you can take
You
all
learn
of
by
the
doing.
textbooks that you can about how to play basketball, but you're not going to get good at basketball unless you actually go out and play it. And that's what you got to do with trading is you just got to get in there and learn from the market.
So how did you approach this? Because when I started off, I had some good mentors when I first
Mhm.
started off, but even then, I blew up multiple accounts, trading futures. And for me, it was a gradual process. I was spending like 6 hours a day just watching the screens, and sometimes I wouldn't even put on a trade, and it was a grind like that for like several years, right?
Oh yeah.
Before I even got into the groove where I was able to consistently make money from the markets. How was your process when you started off?
Well, so the way that I will take a process is I will come up with a market theory. I'll come up with a theory on how I can take advantage of that particular behavior, and then I'll take a period, usually about 2 weeks, of either trading it if I really feel like I know what it's going to do, or if I'm just looking at it an aberration of something that I'm seeing, I'll just only collect sats so that I'm not biased by whether it's going up or down, or if it's in my direction or not. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, look at the data that I have to determine if there's actually an edge in it. And it's kind of a difficult thing because when you actually start trading it, that affects the market, right? So you kind of
Right.
have
Yeah.
to do it. It's kind of like ends up being a brute force thing. Of course, you can always back test, but there's limited use to that, right?
So
So
when you're starting off, you're focusing on simulated trading to gather your data.
yeah, I go in and
Yeah.
gather the data, and then if that seems to be working, then I'll take it live and
Yeah.
check the stats to see if it continues to work. And that is kind of the work.
So
This is
Yeah,
where
that
a lot of people fail, is that they don't keep the stats, they don't keep
the
the data,
stats.
and
Yeah.
so they can never really actually know the reality of what they're doing.
Yeah,
So
that
so how
really
it,
mimics our philosophy here at Ghost Squawk is because we actually care. We give a shit that people don't blow up their account right away. We,
Yeah,
there's some institutions have introducing broker agreements, so they're really pushing people out to trade with live money as soon as possible, and we just don't do that. That's not our philosophy, right? So one of the things I always encourage people to do is trade sim as long as you feel you need to.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
this is not
Yeah.
something I could say trade sim for 6 months. You may have to do it for 3 months or 2 years, right? That's really up to you. That's up to the person. And then, like you said, I also like the fact that you brought up the data-driven approach to this, right? Because that's how I found my style, right? I just, I started off trading Forex, and I realized that Forex products were a little too volatile for me. And I wasn't the type of guy who would like to hold things underwater for a few days before my position came up, even though, I was fairly good with the fundamentals. So that's
Mhm.
when I really found my niche trading bonds, because I could have a much tighter stop loss, and I know very quickly if I'm wrong. Right. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand the macro fundamentals and how they impact the bond market. So I was primarily more successful that way. But I didn't learn that overnight. It was a very long process.
So
Yeah.
how important would you rate simulated trading for all those who are watching and who are really thirsty to get into the markets and make money and they want to jump in live because they think it's easy? How important would you
Oh,
say it
oh,
is to incorporate simulation trading into whether or not you're trading live or whatnot? Because I
yeah,
personally go back to
you
the sim
shouldn't
every now and
trade
then.
live unless you've been trading at sim for a while and you've seen
Well,
success
here's
on
the thing.
sim.
What people don't understand is that there's obviously the technical aspects of trading, the knowledge part, like knowing when to go long or short or whatever, at what price, with your stop loss, at what level, and that's a lot to handle, right? That's a lot to get used to. Okay, then on top of that, you add the emotional aspect. I remember when I had my first trade with real money, I was like, I was like sweating and I was like, pacing about and stuff like that, and I ended up just freaking out and taking like a one tick profit, right? Just because I was just too freaked out, right? And So when you add that emotional instability on top of a skill that you might not be fully mastered yet, it's like, do you think they send the Navy SEALs out into battle after like 2 weeks training? No, they do. It's a very specific, very wicked regimen that they do before they're ready to actually go on a mission. And so I believe that trading should be something similar, where you should understand your platform, how to actually place the trades, the technicals of it, the technique that you're using, and understand that backwards and forwards before you take that step and add the emotional unrest that's naturally going to follow from having real money on the line.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I would say is that the process that you go through as you come up with a trade, that is trading. It's that process of seeing what the market is doing and coming up with a way to take advantage of what it's doing, because you got to realize that it is a zero-sum game. I could go and I could give you a strategy that, I could give you a price, for instance, on the S&P 500 that they're going to touch 80% of the time. And you watch it and they'll go up to it almost every time. But here's the thing, is if everybody knew that that's what it was going to do, the market behavior would change. So in order to really become a profitable trader, you really have to be able to learn how to look at what the market is doing and formulate trades on your own, because you'll get something. And I tell you, man, this happens to me so much as soon as I start doing well with it. And then all of a sudden the market behavior just completely changes and then it fails every time. That's how it gets you. And it's just, that's the nature of markets. And so you have to learn the process. I could give you a signal. Because I am, I do the stream and a lot of people, I guess, like me, and I'm just so lucky because I don't think there's anything special about me.
Somebody said you had a Morgan Freeman voice for trading.
Is that what it is? Thank you.
That's a pretty good compliment there.
I know, right? Which is always weird to me because, I don't think I sound. But thank you very much. No,
must be the microphone.
Yeah, all of the audio equipment and no.
Has a little bass boost on the.
No, I don't. You know what? The microphone, I don't play anything on the microphone. It really is pretty accurate to how I sound, actually.
Nice.
So I appreciate it because I really don't think I sound all that special. But anyways, I've had people give me strategies that straight up work, and I've screwed up trading them. So
well, yeah. The worst. What I've noticed is that you could have the strategy is not as important as the risk management. I mean. Maybe some people would argue with me about that. That's fine. But I've been wrong in trades and still made money because of good risk management. So somebody was just asking to send signals, and that's not really how it works. What we're an institution that teaches you how to trade, to teach you this skill. And, I could sit here and say, even if I was, just like you said, seeing these strategies that actually work that you fail at executing, I could sit here and say, okay, buy this, that, and the other. And you would still lose money because you don't have that knowledge of the risk management. And, things like moving your stops when you're on side, understanding how to scale into a position and get out of one. Those are very, very crucial pieces of information that you can't just solve by here, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I found really interesting in the edges that people have sent to me, because I'll get either, they've been trading successfully. And I know for a fact, because they've shown me years worth of statements that they've been making money doing this. I have other people that say, well, I think this works, but let's back test it. And something that I find almost every time is that if I just go in and I say, okay, where is it that you get in at? And I just back test just that, it is almost never has a positive expectancy. It's maybe close. Some of them, maybe it's close, but it's almost never a positive expectancy. Maybe the good ones, you might be able to get a profit factor of 1.2 or something like that. And what I end up finding is that the reason that their strategy ended up having so much edge was in all of the risk management characteristics of it that were really hard to program. So it was in how did they determine which signals they did and didn't take? How did they size up when they had a winner? When did they choose to take take profits? When did they?
Yeah,
choose
absolutely.
losses?
No,
Those were all
that's
the
a
things
very
that ended up mattering.
that's a
That's
very
some
important
fire
point
advice
that you.
there. That's
Yeah,
some
yeah.
fire
Drop some
advice.
fire on Seth.
No, honestly,
No, but to your point, having done this too, being a quantitative guy and everything, I have done the exact same thing and found the exact same results that you said. The entry point is what I did find was it was more of a ratio between my limit entry, my stop loss, my profit target, and where the nearby levels were, right? Just for the systems that I was trading, right? So basically, you would want to put your limit entry sufficiently far away from the current market price, because I developed a stock bot, a stock trading bot, momentum trading, and it just got crushed, right, because of just all the shenanigans that they pull, in terms of front running and all that, and I never got the price that I wanted and everything. So I had to rethink things, and understanding the volatility and putting your entry price accordingly was very, very important. And sometimes you just won't get filled, and that's okay, right? Because especially when people are new, they get really excited, their dick gets really hard for trading, and they just want to enter right now. And that may work for some, but it definitely does not work for me. I try to take advantage of the squeezes rather than having the squeezes fuck me.
Yep. Well, I will say you almost always want to use a limit order.
Always.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how they figured this out, but Jigsaw Trading, who develops the DOM software that I use, they did their own study, and they found that your chances of being successful as a retail trader without using limit orders is
like virtually none.
Yeah, virtually none.
In fact, I can I can attest to that, because in all my years teaching trading and all my years trading myself, I have seen only one person be successful using limit market orders on a consistent basis. Only one. And I've probably taught, I don't know how many people you think we taught, Chen, like 300, 500, something like that.
Yeah, back at the old institution, like I've easily went across like 200 students, including corporate clients, like TD and National Bank. So it's quite a bit. It's been quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, just hearing from your advice and what you had to say, I could tell anybody who's in like the futures trading Discord with Seth, you guys are in good hands. Like you got some solid advice
exactly.
There. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I have to say, because when I'm streaming, like as I got into before, I just kind of started doing it. I never did this because like I think I'm amazing trading. Sometimes I will do really, really well, and sometimes I will do really, really awful. Like back when the whole Brexit thing was like a confirmed thing, that day I just got crushed. Like I knew what was going on and I knew what I wanted to do, but it was so volatile,
the execution,
and I shouldn't have been trading it, but I did, and I lost. That was a bad day. That totally happens to me, right? But I've always felt that the advantage of my stream, or the thing that makes my stream special, is the community. Like the guys that are there in chat, they know what they're doing, and they're very, very good traders, and I'm just lucky that they chose to stick around.
No, 100%. I mean, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and like I said earlier, I've built my entire community around what I saw, what you did, and
so major props to you.
Yeah,
for
major
that,
props to that. Yeah, to give credit.
I appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. We're always pretty honest about just being two dudes in a basement, right? So we just started trading ourselves, and then we kind of evolved this naturally, and we're the first ones to say we have no clue what the fuck we're doing. We're just kind of going with what works. It's like I like to call it the douched philosophy. That is, do shit till it works.
Man, with that being said, actually, so I actually want to ask you some questions with regards to politics, because I know you're big into politics, and I know we kind of touched on it a little bit back there. But what I found really interesting was that I think like last week or the week before, Sanders dropped out of the front running.
Yeah. He it was kind of, I don't know what he was thinking. I think that his campaign kind of the problem that I've seen with Bernie Sanders, and this isn't like a knock on him or his supporters or anything, because you got to understand this is just the way that people are, and there are certain groups of people that are more susceptible to this than others. And it seemed to me that the Bernie Sanders crowd had really bought into their own bullshit. So they thought that there was a chance up until Wisconsin or whatever it was, and then they finally gave up after that. So I don't really know what he was thinking, but obviously he's dropped out, and it's going to be Biden.
He was swinging for the fences. I mean,
Well,
for a minute, I thought the Democrats had hope until he dropped out, and then everything's on Biden now.
He's also proven himself to be a cuck for the establishment, right? Like I remember when in 2016. When he conceded defeat and backed Hillary Clinton, Jill Stein was asking for him to run with her as an independent. And personally, I think that he would have had a really good chance because aside from the two parties, she had one of the biggest interests among third party contenders. And I think if he was really so had such a hard on for his morals and his values and all that, he would have done just that. But he basically just fell in line, went with the status quo. And I personally think that he was just kind of appeasing the radical left, right? Because I haven't followed this as much as you, but just from what I have read, he was kind of getting that vote. So maybe it was just a way to kind of keep these people pacified. And, now that, that he has backed the establishment, hopefully they would get those votes. But, that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm not really.
I don't know.
I don't have a dog in this fight.
The thing that I notice about Bernie Sanders is that he's a true believer. I mean, he really has been pretty consistent in his ideology through his whole life, very much to his detriment. And it's so bad that, like seriously, all he had to do was say that Cuba is a dictatorship and that they're doing awful things down there. And he could have won. Like literally that's all he had to do. And he wouldn't do it. It's like he was incapable of doing it. And so I really do think that he's a true believer. So then it would make sense that afterwards he would say, well, we got screwed. Let's go and start our own thing. And I don't know why he doesn't do that. But if he's smart, he would realize that, politics is a team sport and you're just not going to get very far if the biggest team is 100% against you, right? Mm-hmm. All you're going to do is help the Republicans win. And so I'm sure that's probably a big part of why he just sucks it up. But it really is incredibly ironic and shocking the way that the Democrat primary turned out. I really didn't think
that's what I thought so too.
That Bernie stood a chance. Like he failed really early on with the whole felons should vote thing. That really hurt him early on. And then he came back and I was like, okay, surprise. But then in the end he still faltered and I was just like, you can't write this stuff, Yeah.
Yeah, clown world.
Well, now that the Democratic Party has basically thrown everything behind Biden, and Biden has his own issues that I find very very funny.
Yeah, I have a meme that I shared in Discord, and it shows Barack Obama talking to Biden, and he says, "I'm endorsing you, Joe," and Joe goes, "For what?"
What this is another just incredibly ironic thing is that if Democrats had literally picked almost anybody else,
right.
The thing is all you needed to do was pick somebody that wasn't incredibly radical and was somewhat competent. And the thing came down to the one that was radical and the one that was incompetent. I don't understand. And there was so many other people. Like I understand why the other candidates didn't get through.
Tulsi Gabbard in particular.
Yeah, Gabbard is kind of her own special case. But we look at some of the other people like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. I understand why they didn't win. But at the same time, it's really hard to look at the way that this is turning out and not
a gay guy named Buttigieg.
They would have been better off picking one of those two right now, right? I don't know.
Man, so what I'm hearing now is like fucking the Democratic Party. They're trying to like lure in Michelle Obama as like his running mate, and that's
really?
gonna it's gonna be like a Bush Dick Cheney scenario where like Bush is the president, but he's not really running everything, and they got everything kind of
Dick
lined
Cheney's
on
really
Dick
running
Cheney.
things.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of like the same scenario where like Biden would be like the president, but he's not really running the show because he's not competent enough, and they'll probably have
Yeah.
everything being run by Michelle Obama.
Well, that's one of the there's always kind of this, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of like, I don't know, there's certain views about it, like theories about what is actually going on underneath of the covers that are really predictable, that are always going to come up, and that is one that I have seen is that Michelle Obama would run. I really don't think that she would run. She's not, she hasn't developed her political career enough, and she's not actually that great of a politician. That they had to rehabilitate her image while she was first lady.
Mhm.
The other one that I always see coming out is that Hillary Clinton will somehow come back out, right? Like people
Lazarus
want to
woman.
believe that it's going to happen, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Who Biden picks as his VP is going to be interesting. They're almost certain that they want to pick a woman, and so that gives us a pretty good idea of who it would be. And when I look at that, I don't really see anybody that would like drastically change the race.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it might not matter, right? Like
Yeah.
right now, he's dealing with this sexual abuse allegations, and just the fact that he sounds like
He's a pretty creepy dude.
complete doofus every time that he opens up his mouth. I mean, oh man, they really, there's polling that shows that he's ahead in many of these key swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Minnesota.
Well,
Those
the
areas.
same
And I'm
polls also
absolutely
said
shocked.
that Hillary was ahead. So
Yeah, well, it's similar polls, and normally I would say, okay, until they've had the conventions, you don't pay attention to those polls. But now we're in a new world where I'm not sure the convention matters, but I'm not convinced that voters really know Joe Biden and realize how big of a disaster his campaign has been so far. We'll see when we get closer to it. A lot of people don't really start paying attention until August. So
Yeah.
Well, well, unpredicted. I mean, like they have Trump ahead. I mean, like
Yeah.
again, it's way too early to tell. What's your take?
but
on,
that is way closer than it's been, right? Like
Yeah.
at the beginning of this year, it was like 60-70% that they
Yeah.
thought he was going to win, and the virus has brought him down to 50%.
right.
But there's still, it's interesting that it's 50-45. That's kind of fun.
right. So what's
I
what's
guess
your,
there's still a predicting that Joe Biden will somehow drop out and that the nominee won't actually be Joe.
Mhm.
what's your take on the odds of the election being canceled or deferred because of this virus pandemic? Because like we discussed earlier, it's way too hard to predict like a month, 2 months down the road. Like we don't even know if we're gonna go back to normal life. Like if things are gonna reopen like at the end of May, right? I mean, a lot of people are saying it could reopen, but I'm hearing otherwise. There's case for both.
Extremely unlikely,
But-
extremely unlikely. So here's the thing.
My money's on
is-
June, July.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Donald Trump and his base is super triggered about anything that has to do with election fraud.
Mhm.
They really don't like that vote by mail is a thing, and I totally understand it because if you don't have like some control over what's printing the ballots, then how do you know that they're not ballot stuffing? If it was a key where everybody was generated and an async key and kind of did it on a blockchain, and I could go and confirm that my key would put in the vote that I put it in for, and that there were only keys given to confirmed citizens, then and that was done through mail or something, then that would be okay. But we don't have that, and so his base is really skeptical about it, and I'm personally a little bit skeptical about it too. But it seems that the American public is very, very much in favor of vote by mail, mostly because they don't really want to have to go into the polls. It's inconvenient for them anyways, right? So
Right.
I really don't think you can stop it on that one side. And then the other side is that Democrats love vote by mail, because a very significant portion of their base, as much as they don't want to admit it, are highly disengaged voters, people that are voting because they're Democrats or because they're told that good people are Democrats or something of that nature, but they're not the people that are like reading the newspaper and super into politics all the time. And they might forget that the election is even happening if somebody doesn't come to their door and pull them out.
Well,
and
yeah,
so in
I think
Democrat
that's
areas,
that's a big reason why Bernie didn't have the turnout, that he was anticipating, because just the millennial generation in general oftentimes fits that demographic that you're speaking of.
100%,
Like, election,
100%.
what election? What's going on, right? Whereas Trump supporters, this is one thing I can definitely say, is that they're very, very polar, and this is a trend I've been noticing throughout the years. I remember when Bush ran against Kerry in the his first election. You could still have a friendly debate, right? You could talk about your views and the other person would respond even if they didn't agree with you, and it wouldn't amount to a fist fight. Nowadays, it's just like you go on YouTube and just for holding a sign, people are getting beaten up and things like that. It's just crazy. And so that polarity is just something that I don't see on the Democratic side for whoever they choose, right? They just can't get behind somebody and be like rah rah.
Oh yeah, I mean, they kind of felt like that way about Bernie, but you're like, it was a really good point. The kids did not show up, and you know what? It's because the kids they don't really care about politics. Like,
well, they want to bitch
might
on the
say that
internet
they will,
and they want to
but,
post funny memes and stuff like that, and make fun of Trump and all that. But when it comes to actually taking a stand, they just don't turn out.
Yeah, Joe Rogan had a bit on that. He's like, yeah, the Democratic supporters are really vocal, but when it comes to voting, he's like, no, voting ain't real.
well, it's not just that, but it really comes down to the Democrat preferred method of persuasion. Okay, and the way that Democrats tend to try and promote themselves is, hey, everybody's doing it. Right. That's always kind of their thing, is like all of the good people, they're voting for Joe Biden, all of the reasonable smart people. And they're all about getting as much saturation in traditional media. So they want to go on all the talk shows and all of these things so that you believe that, hey, the popular guy, the guy that's going to win and that I want to vote for. Like think about Obama. What was always one of the, and I know that it's not a good reason to vote for somebody, but it was absolutely 100% a reason why a lot of people voted for him, is they said, I wanted to be a part of history, having said that I voted for the first black president, right? They 100% try and play the if all your friends are going to jump off a bridge kind of, it's peer pressure, right? And so when you're trying to use peer pressure on extremely disengaged voters, they don't come out. But if you can mail them the ballot so that it's really convenient, or even better, you mail them the ballot and then you have somebody come to their house and collect the ballot from them and maybe even have that person fill it out for them, then hey, it really, and in some areas, it really benefits the Democrat. It really tends to benefit the party that is kind of the underdog. Like here in Salt Lake, if you're a Democrat, you don't show up because your guy never wins, so you don't even matter, right? But if somebody comes to your doorstep and collects the ballot for you,
that's funny.
Okay? So the Democrats really, really want vote by mail, and the pandemic gives them the perfect opportunity to ensure that they get it. And so I think that they have every incentive to ensure that the election happens when they want. And it appears that Donald Trump doesn't want to move it. And so I think probably very unlikely that they will.
Man.
Yeah, I agree.
It's funny you use that analogy because my third grade teacher said the same thing to me when I was following all my friends. She's like, if all your friends jumped off the cliff, would you have done it too?
Right.
I told that
Depends
bitch
how high the bridge
how
is.
high the cliff is.
Is there water below?
This is something that I think is always interesting from the trading community. We actually did a little poll because 538 created a page where you can take a big six personality test, which is more scientific than like the prior mix rigs that's usually floating around. And one of the things that I found, and I kind of always theorized, is that traders tend to have more openness and they tend to be more disagreeable. And that's you're talking to a group of people
100%, man.
is not persuasive at all.
Well,
but
100%.
The thing about traders is that we learn to cut the bullshit, right? We want to get at this. We want to reduce that signal, or we want to increase that signal to noise ratio, right? So we want to get to the heart of it. So we just don't have time for the the corporate speak or any of that. Just get to the fucking point, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, and any of you guys have any other questions? I know we have a big audience here. We have like 9 people who are on the Zoom with us. That was probably like a good time to see if you guys have any questions for Seth. You guys can ask him now.
Yeah, I didn't check us there. Oh, we do have chat in here. Cool. Should have had
Yeah,
that
I have
open.
a question here, Seth.
Sure.
How big is the shift in terms of conservatism versus socialism in the country right now? Because I can feel that there's a change in terms of perception. People, I feel like people are cutting through the bullshit right now, and they start to understand that things should be in a way different. And right now, they're not going. Let's just say that there's a lot of bullshit that has been said lately in the news, and I feel like people start to realize it. So, what's your view on it?
Yeah, so that's kind of a tough one because like overarching, I'm not 100% sure. But we can look down at specific issues and we can definitely see some shifts, right? So one of the things that's really interesting, and I don't know if it's a function of just because Donald Trump is president or if it was that Republicans kind of learned something after the 2008 crisis, but the Republicans seem to be much more pro bailout than they used to, right? After the 2008 crisis, even though Bush was in charge, they were very much against bailing out anybody. And now they're kind of like, well, we need to get this money for this. And why aren't we getting the money for the small businesses? And the Democrats are kind of the one that are saying, hey, maybe we should be fiscally responsible. So that's one big change that has kind of happened. But now there's this other push. And on the Democrat side, the big push that I continue to see among kind of the more progressive left, like if you go on Reddit, for instance, is basic universal income. They're always talking about basic universal income. And there is definitely a feel amongst many people on the left that, oh, here is our opening that we can get more people to go into basic universal income because, you know, we're getting these government stimulus checks. Now, I would be really careful about that kind of how do I put this? And anytime that you have the guys on the left feeling that excitement, like this is our moment and we're part of something big, that is like the big warning sign to like get the fuck away from it, because that always ends up in a disaster for them. That's what happened in the Vietnam War. It happens all the time where they think that something is happening, and what the reality is that you can only get that feeling when you're in a bubble. And when you look at the larger United States, they don't go for it. And so those kinds of feelings, in any political situation, I would be really, really careful about. But then the other side of it is, like we said earlier, what they're doing right now is they're basically giving you a tax break early, right? Like this is going to be a tax return. As an example, for me, I had a baby this year. Okay. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
So in February, my son was born just before all the crazy stuff happened, right? He was born like the first, and then, you know, after that was like Martin Luther King Day. And that's when things really started hitting the fan. Right. One of the things with the stimulus was that you get $500 for every kid, right? But it's based on, or what they gave you in the mail if you've already gotten it, or what they gave you from direct deposit was based on what you filed for your 2019 taxes, right? So what will happen for me is I will go in and I will file my 2020 taxes, and I will have another kid on there, and then they will say, oh, you were supposed to get an additional $500 from the stimulus. So then I will get it in my tax return next year, right? So it is a tax return at that point, right? Now, if you keep doing it, like let's say that we were just going to give everybody $2,000 every month for the, near foreseeable future, at some point you're going to start getting to the point where pretty much everybody has taken out more money than they were paying in taxes for 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it hasn't really kind of hit that point from in the perspective of policymakers. Like policymakers know that that's what this is. So I don't know if the socialism thing is really a thing yet, but there is also Bernie Sanders definitely had a push over the youth vote in this election. And I'm sure that next time around, you're going to get somebody that's, like Pete Buttigieg was doing an okay job with this. He had some other issues, but you're going to get a guy similar to that. There's going to be a lot of Democrats that maybe they're more moderate, but are still going to try and take advantage of that sentiment. But that group tends to change a lot too. So I don't know if it's a real thing. I
do notice that group is very vocal though. So it's kind of hard for me to get a solid signal on that, because they're just so polar and vocal that it's hard to understand what percentage of the population feels that way. When you look on YouTube and you hear these, people ranting about, I actually remember I was in, when I lived in Montreal, at one of the metro stops, there was this group of socialists wearing their little red face masks or whatever, handing out literature. Is it gone to that extent everywhere, or was that just an isolated thing? It's very difficult for me to tell.
Yeah, and the other issue is you got to remember that the idea of basic universal income, like Milton Friedman, who is probably like the most libertarian, right-wing, famous economist ever, right? Yeah, we had ideas that were similar to basic universal income, although what he was presenting was a negative income tax. But similar sorts of things where poor people would automatically get a certain amount of income from the government. But when you're talking about socialism, there's another side to it, because that's not really socialism, right? Even income redistribution is not necessarily socialism, right?
No, it's actually even a part of the deleveraging phase, right?
When the thing that really makes something socialist is when the government takes over the means of production for something,
exactly.
Right? And I think that if they start to get into that sort of area in the United States, I really don't think that people would stand for it, right? No. They came out and they said, well, all these small businesses that are going bankrupt, we should just nationalize them. No way. I don't think people would do it.
Yeah, well, luckily, my family's from Hungary, right? And my cousin remembers when the socialism ended over there. My fiance is from Moldova, right? And she also remembers it. So this is something that's happened in recent history, yet still some people tend to forget that. Or the best one that I hear is, oh, it wasn't done properly. Oh, okay, Stalin, if you had control, then it would just be magic, right? And that's essentially the mark of the dictator mentality right there, which is either way, it's just dangerous, right? Because we would send supplies to family in Hungary, and of course, because the government controlled everything, it would have to pass through checks, and of course they take all the good shit. Like, it was just stuff like aspirin, right? It was just basic necessities that we would send them. So I don't think people understand the ramifications of what they're saying when they're advocating for such a system.
Oh yeah, so we're kind of starting to get a little bit too much into my own personal beliefs here, but one thing I will say off of the back of that is that I have always found that it's usually not the policy failing that's such a bad deal as it is how they react when the policy fails, right? Mm-hmm. Like in communist Russia, Stalin obviously had no clue what he was doing with economics. And when his
Right.
economic ideas failed, what did they do? They doubled down for decades and decades and absolutely destroyed their country instead of just going back
absolutely.
and saying, well, let's
Well,
have
that didn't work.
That sounds like
You
the
know?
hallmark of a
Yeah.
bad trader.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're offside, double down.
This is why I'm always really wary about people like Bernie Sanders that I feel are too ideologically bound to something, because when one of their ideas is proven wrong, they're not going to back off of it.
Well, not only that, but their supporting base is just so rabid and polar that they're not going to give.
Almost wouldn't let them.
That's the mark of a characteristic of a person who cannot admit that they were wrong or cannot reflect on their mistakes and say, I didn't know, I made a mistake. I'm human just like anybody else. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think that the real issue is when your ego is so big that you can't even admit that you're wrong.
Right.
Yep. So we're definitely going to see a lot of this in the next year or so, right? There's going to be people that let's say that everything opens back up. I believe that in our state, probably in the next 2 weeks here, and it sounds like it will be the case in New York too. And if New York goes, probably lots of people will, that they're going to ease restrictions. If we get to the spot where there's a second wave, and you should see more cases when you ease restrictions, but the whole idea is it shouldn't exceed hospital capacity, right? So if we have another wave and hospital capacity gets overrun in certain states, all of the people that were in favor of easing restrictions earlier, like myself, are going to be wrong, right? And are they going to admit it? Probably not. They're going to come up with some way to say that it didn't matter, or that we should still ease the restrictions anyways. Similarly, if they ease the restrictions and everything's fine, and then the fall comes along and maybe we have more cases, but we never reach hospital capacity, then I think that there has to be some real question about, did we take measures further than they actually needed to be? Could we have limited the economic damage? And they're not going to let us discuss those things, right? Because
of course not.
Somebody would have to be wrong in order to start saying that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's going to bring up a lot of uncomfortable questions, and I think it's going to be more like you'll hear Justin Bieber conveniently get a DUI or something, like.
Man, I was watching Dave Chappelle today, and you remember the skit where he's talking about how Michael Jackson has to touch a little kid when times are in crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, it's just like that. It's like Michael, the economy's in a bad situation.
Nothing to see here, folks.
We need you to do it.
Oh man. Oh
my God, man. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. Yeah, guys. Anybody who is on the Zoom with us, do you guys have any additional questions for Seth?
Yeah, Seth. Do you think there is a chance that if the second wave reach to exceed maximum capacity on hospitals, the government could hide that data from the public?
Oh man. Well, first of all, I sure hope that we don't exceed hospital capacity. I think that in the United States, to really hide something like that would be super difficult. So just for instance, all of the data for the United States of the number of cases and everything of that nature that you're seeing across all of the states is like open source and is on GitHub. So you can like download this data and run it through R if you really wanted to do that kind of analysis. Like they're making it really, really open. And the places in where we're saying that like data may or may not be accurate is like, okay, somebody died. Did their cause of death appropriately get marked as coronavirus? Or, some people on the other side are saying, well, this person died. They were really died because they had cancer, but because they had coronavirus at the time that they died, it was put down as their cause of death, right? So these are the sorts of things. Those are kind of like
Edge
I don't
cases.
think that the edge cases, right? Like it wouldn't significantly change the percentages, right? So to like
Is
straight
that
up lie in the way that like China has, for instance, I think would be really, really hard. But what they do and what they have done is they emphasize or de-emphasize certain parts, right? Like we were told that there was going to be 2 million people died. I mean, really, if we weren't told that there was going to be 2 million people that were going to die, would everybody have been willing to lock down the way that we have? I don't know, but there was a lot of data out there at the time, and I know that a lot of people here in the trading community, because people on my stream were talking about it all the time, saying, "Well, it's probably not going to be 2 million people before this summer because the death rate is not as high as they're saying it is."
Yeah, I know my aunt. She runs, I believe it's Mount Sinai. It's a hospital in South Florida, and she was saying how the staff is told to be, they're told to increase staff and all this. And my conversation with her was in the beginning of April. So I don't know if this has changed significantly, but you know how many cases they actually had come in? It was only 4.
Yeah,
right. And Mount Sinai is part of a kind of a conglomerate of hospitals with 4 sister hospitals, and each of them had similar statistics. So I know
they were turning other people away to make room for coronavirus patients that never came.
Exactly. And so my thing is, I don't know if there's some truth to it being, the virus being averse to warm weather, but the data seems to support that so far in Florida, because these statistics might be dated, but I was under the impression that we've only had like 20,000 cases in the entire state, right? And so I don't know if maybe that wave just hasn't reached us, or maybe there's some truth to it, the weather affecting the spread of the virus, or just that it's really not as bad as they're saying it is, and the media is really trying to sensationalize things. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that you're gonna see one thing from the media, but if you want to be informed, you will be, and if you really kind of go in and watch, you can kind of go on Reddit and see what are the talking points for the guys on Reddit, and then you can go and watch the president's press briefing and see what the president's talking points for the day are, and you can kind of see what people are emphasizing, and you'll go back and you'll look at the data and you'll be like, well, why aren't they talking about this, or why aren't they talking about that? They choose to focus our attention in particular areas, and sometimes it is because they don't want us, like to avoid public panic and stuff.
So are you optimistic about the future, or pessimistic?
Well, I think that up until September, I think we should be fine. That's just me. I'm not a disease expert, and I have not been going through the data as heavily as I could. I haven't pulled that stuff into R and done my own graphs and try to predict. The only prediction that I ever made was that there will be at least 10,000 deaths in New York alone in the month of April, and that was a gross underestimate. I think that they're almost to 20,000 now, right? But I also do think the heat is going to do a significant help. I mean, in indoor areas, it's still going to be a problem, but it's not going to be spreading outdoors in the summer. And I don't see why this particular virus would be any different from every other coronavirus that does poorly in hot weather. And you can see, like Daniel was saying, Florida has kind of almost been reckless with this, right? Like this was where the governor was, they asked him, why haven't you given a shelter at home order? And he's like, oh, should we have done that? Like, and they haven't been hit hard at all. They haven't been hit hard at all. So I think that there's substantial evidence to indicate that it's falling through. But I am concerned about the fall, because what I'm worried about is that not enough people are going to catch it between now and then. And then you're going to get into the fall and you're going to have a situation where the rate of transmission will be much higher and not enough of the population has reached there. And then you're in danger of reaching hospital capacity again. And then they're going to have to shut things down.
Is that a potential trait that you can?
Well, it's certainly not one that you can take advantage of now, right? If I was going to do a trade right now. The thing that I would be looking at is like what Daniel was saying earlier, like how many companies are actually going to be going bankrupt, and what is the actual net decrease in GDP across the year. So this Wednesday we get the GDP data, some preliminary GDP data. So that's going to be a key sticking point there. We're still kind of going through company earnings. There's some real question from a technical perspective, just looking at the charts, if this rally can really continue through this area. I think that there's a really high probability that we either turn down or we range in this area. This past week, we've been ranging through here, we actually ended the week down, or sorry, I think we're down on the month, right? It's possible that we could go sideways for some time until we really realize what those impacts are. And then when they do come in, if we go back down, then you kind of have this crunch question again, right? We've printed all this money and we're still going down. Do we have to do more? And what are the actual impacts on the currency when we start having to do more and like stuff really starts to, that's where there could be a trade. The difficulty with that trade is that it's so volatile. Retail trader unlikely to be able to hold it, right? just like the move down was. But those are the things that I would be looking for. And then yes, if we start to see things in the fall that indicate to us, like based on antibody tests and what transmission rates are going to be, those are going to be the two things you're going to have to look at, is like how many people are still left to get it and what is the transmission rate, and based on that will we reach hospital capacity. So what is the capacity of your how many hospital rooms are available in your state? And that could be one where you might be able to get in it early, because I know that there was plenty of people and my Discord, and I was not one of them, that were concerned about the virus very early on, starting the beginning of like mid-January, and took advantage of it. So that might be. But like I said, it's a tough one to do. I think that you're better off saving your money and then trying to if we do go down again, getting your stuff in there lower.
That's some solid advice.
That kind of mirrors a lot of the advice that we've been giving, is that finding a way to trade this on a margined account is going to be very difficult, right? Like your Brexit trade, for example. It's just you could be right, but just get crushed by the volatility. So what we're trying to do is just find some long-term investment picks, because it's like stocks are on discount right now, and that discount could be increased, right? We tell people that look, stocks are at a bargain right now, but they could go further. So if you're planning on holding on keeping these things for a few years, like my analogy is, if Hugo Boss is having a 50% off sale, we don't sell our suits, right? We go and buy more, right? And if that price is that sale extends to 75% off, we just go and buy more. Right. Yeah. So depending on your situation, how much you have to allocate, I think that long term that there's some really good opportunities, and it's probably going to get better because like you, I foresee another wave of a bear market. Just as some of these defaults start coming in and maybe we start seeing more civil unrest, or the policies are ineffective, or there's uncertainty about the elections or something like that. I just think that the risks are more slighted to the downside than they are to the upside. And so, I loaded up on some stocks the other day, and I'm waiting for another push to get some more.
Yeah, when based on my understanding of the data from like a valuation perspective, I would expect that Warren Buffett maybe would have bought some stuff, but that he would be holding off on buying anything else right now and be waiting for it to come down again. Right. Like from many metrics, we're already valued high again. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I completely agree with you there. I completely agree with you there.
This whole thing that it's like when everybody believes in the market that something is going to happen, it's really hard for that thing to happen. It's either going to happen all at once, or it's going to go the wrong way and stop everybody else out first before it will go. That's why rallies are always fueled by skepticism, right? Like this rally, nobody buys it. I don't know a single trader I literally don't know a single trader that's like, oh, we're going to have a V-shaped recovery and this is going to be great and it's going to go up. And yet it continues to go. Why? Because there's so many retail guys out there trying to short it and providing the fuel that they need to push it into new prices higher.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was that meme about me waiting for the next recession, and it showed the skeleton.
Right.
And I know tons of people. I know one particular guy who he just really had a hard on for buying puts on the S&P, and he just did that for months and just got wrecked over and over and over. And then maybe one time, just even a broken clock is right twice a day. So one time, there was a little bit of correction. He said, "See, guys, I was right all along." It's like, well, okay, show me your whole P&L and all the times you just got wiped out.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, saying the things that I am right now makes me incredibly uneasy, because the whole thing that I've taken over the past 8 years is that when all of the retail guys are screaming their heads off that they're wrong and they get destroyed every time.
Yeah,
like literally, it's like you'll see some technical indicator, they'll say here's this level, and if they reach this level, then that's where things got to really start to get ugly, and they will reach that level and everybody will freak out for a day, and then like 2 more days will go by where like nothing really happens, and then all of a sudden it just rallies out of nowhere and goes up and never stops. And I've done well off of those guys, and I'm very nervous suddenly being one of them.
Yeah, we have something that we like to call the retail trader index. Right.
Yes.
And the inspiration for this was, when we taught at the other institution, there were some very vocal minds with some very interesting opinions. And the markets just had a great way of doing the exact opposite of what they said. And so we just, it's like a hypothetical index. It's like, wouldn't it be awesome if we could have access to all these retail traders, especially the more vocal ones, right? Access to their accounts and see where they're putting their positions so we can put counter positions.
Oh yeah, there was something interesting right here on the tweet deck that I've noticed. This is a very good example of what you guys are talking about right here. One analyst says oil can go to negative $100 per barrel.
Yeah, probably not. That whole thing with oil, I have to say, man, I know we're kind of going over, but like when you get me talking, it's hard to get me to stop because
No, I'm the same way. We can go on for hours. Like we have to set a cutoff time, or else we could be here for a long time.
I don't know what it was that possessed those guys to think that they were going to hold those contracts to expiration.
I think they just didn't know.
I can only assume that it was an idiot, or maybe there was somebody they really were going to store it and something happened, like a deal fell through or they got margin called or something like that. Anybody that is going to go into, holding a contract past the rollover coming into next month is stupid. And I don't think that we're going to have the same kind of craziness that we did this time around just because of that.
Man,
I think all those idiots their accounts are blown up, so we won't.
Yeah, I would hope so. But there's a lot of people that seem to think they can trade oil now. So.
Yeah, everybody becomes an oil expert once we have a little bit of volatility.
They're like the dip buyers who are like, I liked it at $5, I liked it at $4, I like it at $3. This can't go to zero.
I like it at -30.
And this can't go to zero, and then they find out the hard way.
This is another thing that kind of makes me nervous about the market right now. Is like you can tell when you're watching the tape, like when market regime has changed.
Oh yeah,
because you will see that all retail traders get washed out. You go into Discord, you'll see that certain guys that were always there aren't there anymore.
Yeah. So people are conspicuously
the volume is
quiet.
not the same. The volume is just not the same. The liquidity is just, especially now, like the liquidity is gone. And here we're coming into this period. It's like we just had like a huge flush, and here's all these guys that are like, I'm going to trade oil now. Like, there's still too many bloody idiots out there with too much money, apparently.
Yeah. I'm sure the CME will be happy to take it from them.
Well, that's what makes a good market to trade. I mean, like sometimes you need retail traders and you need to take money from them, right?
Yeah, it's not even like it's. I don't like the idea of like that the market is rigged against a certain group of people per se, but the market is rigged in that the person that ends up winning ends up making way more money than anybody else. And it
Right.
really is just when you look at the statistics of it, right? Like, just look at the way that most traders trade. You have a stop and you have a target, and most retail traders are looking for a larger target than their stop, right?
Mhm.
So if you're a big guy, really all you've got to do is move
Stop
the market
market.
larger than what the stop is, and you're going to
Yeah.
stop everybody out into you, and then you can go and make it move to where you want it
Stop
to move.
hunting,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so the market is really kind of set up in a way that in the end only 5% of the traders are actually going to be successful.
Oh, I
It's
would say
not
only
like
like
it's
one.
rigged in favor of a particular guy. That guy could be anybody, but in the end it's going to be that 5% that ends up.
Well, not only that, but you're playing against the technology aspect of it too. You brought this up earlier with all the technology that Goldman Sachs has, for example, and the other big banks are the same. It's just most retail traders just don't have anywhere near that capacity of tools to use. And that was actually one of the inspirations for the Ghost Squawk tools, that, if we have this natural language processing algorithm running on the sentiment, risk sentiment is one of the hardest things to really understand, because, you got to understand what that means for bonds and stocks. How did you arrive at that conclusion? Some news about oil comes out. How is that risk on or risk off? So it helps. It's a tremendous tool to help people get a leg up on those sorts of things. But still, there's banks with teams of people that just handle tool development, right? So you're not going to be able to compete against those guys.
Well, that's why when you make money, like, hold on to it, right?
Oh yeah.
I can't tell you if you're one of those guys. I know a guy, or I heard a story from a friend. One of his really good friends happened to be in one of those oil ETFs. He bought long into the oil ETF after it plummeted, and he made $250,000 before they forced him out of the trade. And when you catch one of those, like, the tendency for people is to say, I'm doing awesome, like, let's size it up and I can trade bigger. And no, don't do it. Like, you got the money out, keep it. You became one of the big guys. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to try and get it back from you.
Yeah, it's the Pareto distribution too. 20.
This is the casino mentality
80,
right there.
80% of your profits only come from 20% of your trades. So,
yeah,
capital management is an important skill.
Man, yeah, we're running over 2 hours here. So,
Yeah.
do you guys have any final questions for Seth on the stream, guys? Yes, no. I take it by the silence. That's a no. Yeah, so I guess we'll leave it at that. Seth, I just want to say a big thank you for coming out, for joining us on the Ghost Squawk Experience. Like, you had a lot of very interesting comments to bring to the show. What you're doing, the Futures Trading channel, on your own Discord is fantastic. And for those who are on your Discord, they're in really good hands. We big thank you from myself and from from Daniel.
From me as well too.
For coming out and for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a good chance that Ghost Squawk either wouldn't be here or would be in a very different form if we hadn't seen your channel. So major props. Cheers to Seth.
Yeah, so
drop some money on Seth.
Cheers to Seth. We'll drop some money
really
on you for
appreciate
coming out.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much for coming out, Seth. Anybody who wants to reach out to Seth, the information to reach out to his Discord, his YouTube channel is in the links. If anybody wants to see what Ghost Squawk is up to, you guys can find more information about us in the links as well. Thank you for everybody that was watching us on the stream. Hope you guys have a great evening and stay profitable to everybody.
Stay spooky, guys.
And stay spooky.